rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Here's today's prophecy update. U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work said Friday that NATO will place 4 battalions, each with 4,000 troops, on the borders of Poland and the Baltic states with Russia. The placement of forces is a response to Russia's constant maneuvers and other military operations on its borders with Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, Work added. 2 battalions will be sent by the U.S., while Britain and Germany will each send 1. The deployment will mark the first time in 75 years since Germany's invasion of Russia during World War II for German forces to be placed on Russia's eastern border. American and British forces have never been placed so close to the Russian frontier. There is no doubt that the step will increase tensions between the U.S. and Russia and result in military responses by Moscow. With the prophecy of the Sixth Trumpet War looming on the horizon, this escalation of tension between the world's 2 superpowers sends danger signals to all of us. Remember, the Sixth Trumpet War prophesied in the Bible is not a possibility. It is an absolute certainty. The only question is, when will it happen? Well, I want to talk to you today about international law. We continually hear, well, that's against international law, or this is against international law. But what do we mean by international law? Where did it come from? Where did it all start? I mean, we've gone throughout all of human history without this concept, but all of a sudden, here it comes. And this especially is true concerning Israel. Our government likes to say repeatedly that the settlements that are out in Judea, Samaria, that they are a violation of international law. Now, with that comes the threat of international sanctions from the international community. So I want to take some time today to talk about the sources, the roots of international law. What does it really mean? Is it legitimate? Or should international law be thrown in the trash bin of history? What's it all about? Now, the reason this is important is because the invasion of Israel by the world community during the Battle of Armageddon will be done under the guise of enforcement of international law. So this concept is not going away. It is something that all of us need to understand. Let's talk for a moment about the Sykes-Picot deal. This comes from the Jerusalem Post, some of this commentary. A day in May 2016 will mark the century of the famous or notorious Sykes-Picot Agreement. But what day is the subject of some disagreement? The Encyclopedia Britannica says the agreement dates from May the 9th of 1916. An online legal site asserts that it was signed on May the 16th. The magazine Foreign Affairs offers us May 17th. The online site History.com favors May the 19th, and the Jewish Virtual Library maintains that it came into existence on May 23rd. Regardless of when it was, we know that it happened in May, sometime in May of 1916. Here we are at the 100th anniversary of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is still in effect and is responsible for much of the conflict and chaos that we're presently experiencing in the Middle East, particularly over the last 5 years or so. Okay, let's go into it. Putting the fine detail to one side, the fact remains that during the First World War, the so-called Triple Alliance, that was Britain, France, and Imperial Russia, fighting the German, Austro-Hungarian, Turkish alliance, they conspired together to dismember Turkey's Ottoman Empire at the first opportunity. Discussions began in November of 1915 while the war was still progressing, and the final agreement took its name from its negotiators, Sir Mark Sykes of Britain and Francis George Picot of France. Those were the negotiators. So, what was the Sykes-Picot agreement? In essence, it was an understanding to carve up the vast areas of the Middle East, then under the control of the Ottoman Empire, into British and French spheres of influence. Some to be under their direct rule, some to be administered by Arab governments, but subject to British or French tutelage. It was under these Sykes-Picot inspired provisions that in July of 1922, the huge area then designated as Palestine passed into the control of Great Britain, which was charged with establishing a national home for the Jewish people therein. 51 member countries, the entire League of Nations, unanimously declared on July the 24th of 1922, recognition has been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. Let's pause there just a moment. This was 1922. Think about what a wonderful thing it would have been if that would have been implemented speedily. That means Israel would have had a place to run to when the pressures of Adolf Hitler began. Well, it was not implemented as quickly as it should have been. Consequently, the Jews were trapped in Europe, where 6 million of them were slaughtered. Incomprehensible. Nevertheless, let's continue on. It had been agreed in the Cairo Conference of March 1921, convened by Britain's colonial secretary, Winston Churchill, that Transjordan, we call it Jordan today, would be added to Britain's Palestine mandate on condition that the Jewish national home provisions would not apply there. Okay, now let's get this clear in our minds. So they decided, all right, there's going to be this Palestinian state called Jordan on the east side of the Jordan River. On the west side of the Jordan River will be Israel. Okay. Britain presented this done deal to the League of Nations, and so just 2 months after granting Britain the Palestine mandate, the League of Nations consented to Britain declaring that the provisions for setting up a Jewish national home would not apply to the area east of the Jordan River. In other words, Jews would not be over there on the east side of the Jordan River. Consequently, 3/4 of the territory originally included in the mandate became the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The subsequent history of the British mandate is well known. Britain failed to reconcile Arab leaders to its commitment under the mandate. Opposition flared into open revolt. Armed clashes between Arabs and Jews proliferated, and British troops were pulled further and further into what amounted to open warfare against both sides. Now let's pause just a moment there. So what we had here, we had a determination by Great Britain and France. They were sharing responsibility there. As a result of this Sykes-Picot agreement, we had an agreement that Britain would create a state for the Jewish people. They had not had one for 2,000 years. However, once this decision was made, the Arabs began to fight against the Jews because they always do. They hate the Jewish people. And so they were fighting against the establishment of a homeland. Now, the British Mandate, the area called Palestine at the time, was very scarcely populated. Not a lot of people there. So they were going to establish this homeland, but it resulted in conflict between the Arabs and the Jews, and ultimately the British ended up fighting against both of them. Well, let's continue on. Under pressure, Britain virtually reneged on its mandate commitment. Far from facilitating a Jewish national home, the White Papers of 1930 and 1939 restricted immigration and the acquisition of land by Jews. Now, this is very important. Britain issued these White Papers in 1930, 1939, and this severely limited the number of Jews that could come into Israel. Now the Jews were trapped because in 1938, the night of the broken glass broke out and the persecution against the Jews in Germany began in earnest and then continued throughout World War II. So because this had not been implemented speedily, now the Jewish people were trapped. Okay, so the war came and went. Adolf Hitler is defeated. The concentration camps are uncovered. The horrors of what happened there suddenly came to the light of the entire world. 6 million Jews dead. In the meantime, 52 million people had died worldwide in this war. Worst war ever. The worst war before that was World War I. 8 million died. That was the worst war of all history. Now then, 20 years later, 52 million died, 8 times as many. It was incredible. Well, now, here we are. The war is over. The United Nations was born to create a structure to prevent war from ever happening again. The world was sick of war. And in desperation for peace, they decided to deal with the Israeli problem and with establishing a Jewish homeland. Now, this is only 2 years after the birth of the United Nations. UN was born in October of 1945. Here we are in November 29th of 1947. The British had already said, we want out of this situation. We don't want to control the British mandate anymore. We're going to turn everything over to the UN. So even before the British pulled out, the UN began to act. And on November the 29th, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution to partition Palestine. Now, Israel accepted the partition plan. In other words, this area called Palestine, they've already partitioned off a Palestinian state called Jordan, but now they're going to create another Palestinian state and only leave Israel a little sliver, only a small percentage of the biblical promised land. So they launched this partition plan, but the Jewish people were so glad to have any place to call their home, even though it was the size of a postage stamp. I'm talking about an area half the size of the state of Indiana. Even though it was so small, they were so glad to have a place to call home that the Jewish people accepted it, but it was rejected by the Arabs. Thus, the whole deal became null and void because it was not a mandatory resolution. It had to be accepted by both sides. The Arabs rejected it, so it became worthless. Now, in the meantime, Britain had announced the termination of its mandate in the area of Palestine, and they announced they would be pulling out on May the 15th of 1948. Well, Israel, seeing the handwriting on the wall, what's going to happen now? We're going to be left here with no one. The British Army is going to be gone. It's just us and the Arabs. Consequently, on the evening of May the 14th, the day before the pullout, Israel declared its independence. The state of Israel was proclaimed. Then the very next day, on May the 15th of 1948, 6 Arab nations launched war against Israel in an attempt to snuff out the fledgling state as soon as it was born. Jordan came across the Jordan River. Now remember, Israel only had 600,000 people total. That's men, women, and children. They did not have a well-equipped army. Here they were fighting for their very existence. But they were a desperate people because they were choosing between staying there and fight the Arabs or going back to the concentration camps of Europe, which they wanted nothing to do with. Consequently, Jordan came across the Jordan River and came against the small nation of Israel. They occupied the West Bank, which is the area biblically called Judea, Samaria, the area from the Jordan River all the way up and including East Jerusalem. Well, the war fought on for a while, and amazingly, Israel not only survived, but actually expanded its territory a little bit. But when the armistice, the ceasefire, was signed on 1949, the armistice stated that the ceasefire line should under no circumstances be regarded as permanent borders. So everything was frozen in place. Jordan occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, there was no outcry, oh, Jordan's got to leave occupied territories. There was no outcry about that. And there was no desire to establish a Palestinian state. They controlled the whole thing. They didn't want a Palestinian state. They wanted to eradicate Israel. That's what they wanted. Well, for the next 19 years, that's the way things remained. However, in 1967, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the head of Egypt, felt like he was strong enough to take Israel on. He made a mutual alliance with Jordan and with Syria and decided it was time to wipe Israel off the map. Egypt invited the UN troops to leave that had separated Israel from Egypt since the armistice of 1949, and the UN just got up and left. Nasser moved his troops into their place along the southern border of Israel. And furthermore, he blockaded the Straits of Tiran, which are international waters. That's an act of war within itself. He begins to make very belligerent speeches. It's time to wipe this hated Zionist entity off the map. Well, Israel's not going to stand aside and just let this happen. Consequently, Israel, on June the 5th, her planes left Israel, went over the Mediterranean Sea, and flying 500 feet above the ground, below radar, caught 90% of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground and wiped out the Egyptian Air Force. The war went fast. In 6 days, it was over. Israel had conquered. Now, in the meantime, though, Israel contacted the country of Jordan, did not know that Jordan was going to enter the war, and said to King Hussein of Jordan, if you'll stay out of the war, we have nothing against you. We will leave you alone. But if you attack us, we will counterattack with all of our might. Well, Jordan did not stand aside. Jordan did launch an attack against Israel. Israel counterattacked, sweeping all the way the Jordan River and reunifying Jerusalem, bringing it together. Okay. Since that time, 1967, Israel has possessed the Golan Heights because that's where Syria attacked Israel from. So they took the Golan Heights. They took the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, sweeping all the way to the Jordan River. Now then, they have what the British mandate originally was going to give them, well, except for the vast area that had been turned over to Jordan. So this was the situation, and it has remained so since 1967. Now, the world chant is, you've got to withdraw to 1967 borders. There are no 67 borders because the armistice that was agreed to by the international community said the borders of the armistice of 1949 should not in any way be considered permanent borders. Now, let's absorb this for a moment. We're talking about international law because repeatedly now we're hearing from almost every nation on earth, including the United States, Israel must withdraw from the settlements. There's 800,000 Jews that live out there now. Everybody says those are all illegal. Illegal under international law. What international law? The last time an international body, the League of Nations, ruled on Palestine, the area called Palestine. The last time they ruled on it, they said that that territory belonged to Israel. But now then, all the rules have changed, and they want to box Israel in closer and closer and closer, because there's more to this than just the struggle of world powers. This is a struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan. And we're headed toward the final war between God and Satan. The Bible is crystal clear that there's another war coming. It's called the Battle of Armageddon. And even though the nations of the world are going to think it's their idea, and they're going to be trying to make Israel withdraw to 67 borders and obey the edicts of the international community, even though that's what they're going to be thinking, that's not what it's going to be at all. It's going to be Satan's final effort to destroy the Jewish people off the face of the earth. Okay, so international law supposedly says that Israel's occupation of Judea, Samaria is illegal. But let me remind you, international law is simply one world government. If the United States of America is subject to international law, then we're not a sovereign country anymore. International law is one world government and should be rejected. I listened very carefully to the speech of Donald Trump, his foreign affairs speech that was so trumpeted as being so important. And I noticed that he said we will not submit to the foolishness of globalism. I was so glad to hear him say that. Now, the establishment screamed to high heaven because he said it. He said, we're going to put America first. We're not going to yield our sovereignty. If we don't enforce our borders, we don't have a country anymore. Well, I thought, Trump understands what's going on here. He understands this battle to impose international law upon the nations of the world. President Obama is a big believer in one world government. And most of our presidents over the last 30 or 40 years have been a believer. President Bush Sr., with great pride, announced the birth of the New World Order immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Bill Clinton was a big believer in unilateralism. He's the one that opened the gates to establish the International Criminal Court so that everybody on earth could be placed under international law, not just governments, now then every individual, you, me, all of us. If we commit certain acts, we can be hauled before the International Criminal Court and placed on trial without the protection of the Bill of Rights or the U.S. Constitution. That happened under Bill Clinton. And the Treaty of Rome was signed it was 1988, I believe it was, that the Treaty of Rome was signed. No, it must have been 1998 that the Treaty of Rome was signed. And then by 2002, it was ratified, and the International Criminal Court is now placing people on trial. You could be put on trial for a hate crime. You say, what's a hate crime? Well, if you happen to speak against a minority, whether it's a racial minority, a religious minority, a sexual minority, those are all crimes under the International Criminal Court. Now, fortunately, the United States of America has not signed that treaty. Originally, it was signed by Bill Clinton, but then George W. Bush rescinded our signature because at least he understood that would be the end of U.S. sovereignty, and he himself could have been placed on trial for his actions in Iraq because he started a war without the approval of the United Nations. And the Secretary General at the time was asked point blank, do you believe that the invasion of Iraq by the United States and Great Britain was an illegal war? He said, I do believe it was an illegal war, which makes it a war crime. And George W. Bush, if the U.S. signed the International Criminal Court, he would still be subject to being tried before the International Criminal Court. So the one world governmental system is closing its tentacles around us Now, what's the Bible say about all this and what's going to happen? Well, the international government of the end time is clearly described in Revelation 13. It's symbolized as a beast. A beast in Bible prophecy always represents a nation or a kingdom. It's symbolized as a beast. The beast has the feet of the bear, Russia's symbol, the mouth of the lion, Great Britain's symbol, the body of the leopard, Germany's symbol, the 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom, a 10-nation alliance that will come out of Europe. But the interesting thing is, the eagle is not there now. The eagle was in the prophecy of the 4 separate nations in Daniel 7. Originally, these same symbols were used 650 years prior, and the United States is shown as the eagle growing out of the lion. Of course, that's where we came from, Great Britain. But when we move from the Old Testament to the New Testament, Revelation 13, when they all merge together for the end time one world government over which the Antichrist will rule, everything is brought over except the eagle's wings. Now, what does that mean? Apparently, it means the United States will not be a part of this end time one world governmental system. As a matter of fact, one chapter before this, we are described as defending Israel against the Antichrist and his one world governmental system. So we have good news. It looks like, probably in this election, the forces against globalization, against one world government, the forces for restoring American sovereignty and rebuilding our borders, it appears that those forces, whoever is going to represent them, will probably win the present election that's in progress right now. Well, we've got a lot to talk about today. I will be taking your calls later on in the program. You are listening to End of the Age. This would be a wonderful day to become a partner with Endtime Ministries. Why don't you do it right now? We'd love to have you on board. We need you. God needs you. The number to call, 1-800-END-TIME, 1-800-363-8463. And stay with us. We'll continue.
Take your understanding of the end time to a new level with our Outlines and Quizzes workbook. This workbook accompanies our Understanding the End Time 14 lesson series. As you watch each lesson, follow along with the outlines, then take a quiz and check your answers at the end. These are all contained in one convenient workbook so you can study as well as teach prophecy wherever you go. Use it as a study guide to cement main points and scriptures that Irvin teaches in each lesson. It's also a great tool if you host an end-time Bible study. Help your group solidify what they're learning by getting a copy for each person to follow along with the video and then to take home and study on their own. Get the workbook by calling 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com and be ready to instruct many as the scripture says.
Be encouraged about the great plan God has for our generation at End Time Prophecy Conferences. Come be in an atmosphere of people who are excited about living in the generation that will welcome back Jesus to the earth. Join us in Plymouth, Michigan, May the 6th and 8th. For more information, go to endtime.com/events or call 1-800-END-TIME. Irvin Baxter and our End Time team will look forward to meet you and hope you'll gain new understanding as prophecy continues to unfold.
Hey, this is Anthony from the End of the Age control room. So I know some of you are about to turn your radio off because your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age. We're sorry about that, but we have good news because now is your cue to turn your computer or mobile device on and head on over to endtime.com. There, click the watch button to continue to listen or watch the program, and we'll see you there for the next segment of End of the Age.
We are taking your calls in this segment of the program. The number to call to be on the air with me, 877-END-TIME. To reach our operators, that number is 1-800-END-TIME. That's to reach me, 877-363-8463. Now, before I come to our callers today, there's another article that just appeared in the Jerusalem Post, Time to Liberate the World from International Law. Think about it. It is important to ask why so many countries have accepted as binding concepts, borders, and treaties whose origins are archaic and colonial. Things that were decided 100 years ago we're still trying to say this is the way the world has got to be, even though it's causing incredible chaos. So we'll be talking more about that a little bit later, perhaps. Nevertheless, incredible things that we're dealing with right now. The things that the Bible talks about, world government in the end time, are at issue right here in our present presidential election. Are we going to have open borders? That's what Hillary Clinton is campaigning on. That's what Barack Obama has done. He has absolutely refused. As a matter of fact, he's violating the law by not enforcing our borders. The enforcement of our borders is required by law, but President Obama is violating the law, and by executive order, he has just washed away the laws of the United States of America. Well, hopefully that will be reversed in the coming election. We certainly need for it to be. Let's go ahead and move to the phones now. Joe is calling from Kentucky. Hello, Joe.
Yes, Brother Baxter.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to ask you a very specific question, and this is something that I've been, thinking about, and I've been talking to other people. You mentioned in one of your that there was a creation before Adam and Eve. Is there a scripture in the Bible that talks about that?
I do believe there was a creation before Adam and Eve, because the Lord told Adam and Eve, go out, multiply, and replenish the earth. You cannot replenish something that was not previously inhabited. Furthermore, in the book of Isaiah, we're told concerning Satan, thou wast the cherub that covered the earth, thou wast perfect, and was in the garden of God until iniquity was found in you. So Satan was the god of this world. That was his calling before the present creation. So I do believe there was a previous creation, but they were not human beings. There were other creatures.
Oh, they were not human beings?
That's right. They were not human beings.
Well, I called somebody from NASA the other day, and the scientists at NASA believe that Mars and Venus used to be like planet Earth a long time ago. And the person I talked to, they said that they found significant structures on Mars, and they said that the possibility that the astronauts, when they went to the moon, they also found structures on the moon. And I was wondering if this is the leftover from the previous creation, or do you think God created other creatures in the universe beside us?
Well, Joe, God can do whatever he chooses to do. He could have 1,000 worlds out there if he chose to that you and I don't know anything about. Now, we don't have any evidence that in fact is happening right now. We do know, though, that there are creatures, they're angels. We know that there are multitudes of angels that were here before the creation, and they existed. And we also know that 1/3 of the angels rebelled against God, and they took side with Satan. So now then 2/3 of the angels are with God and 1/3 are with Satan. And all that existed before we ever existed. So consequently, everything is possible to happen, but in the Bible, we're not told anything about those things, if in fact they do exist.
Okay, so there's no scripture in the Bible where it talks about extraterrestrials or...
No, there's
like
not.
that, right?
We do know there are demons. We do know there are angels. But as far as saying that there are people coming from Mars or from some other planet, even when, I don't know exactly what NASA told you, but when they said they discovered structures, I don't believe they were meaning they discovered buildings. I think they were saying that they discovered some formations of some sort that they thought might have been able to sustain some form of life. I don't know exactly what they were meaning. Every article I've ever read says that there's presently no planet that has the ability to sustain human life as we know it. Of course, If there's another form of life that doesn't have to breathe oxygen, that operates in a totally different way, then they could exist anywhere. And there could be forms of life that are invisible that we know nothing about. So those are questions we're probably going to wait till Jesus comes back to find out about.
Oh, so God can create anything he wants, right?
Sure he can.
Okay. All right, brother, and welcome back from your trip.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been pretty busy. We got home from Israel and just had to turn right around and go see about a family emergency. But nevertheless, it's good to be back in studio today. We do have open lines. If you want to get through to us, the number to call is 877-END-TIME to reach our operators, 800-END-TIME. And I'm talking about this concept of international law. Now, President Obama has used the pry bar of international law to put pressure on Israel. Originally, when the United Nations, after the 1967 war, remember, it was the Arabs that started the 67 war. It was Jordan that attacked Israel. Israel counterattacked, and Jordan attacked from occupied territories. That territory was not Jordanian. That territory was occupied by Jordan in 1948 in the War of Independence. So now Israel has the territory. It didn't belong to anybody before Jordan. It was part of the British mandate, which the Sykes-Picot agreement had said should go to the establishment of a Jewish homeland. Well, guess what? It's a Jewish homeland now. But there's all kinds of problems about it because the world community and the media have tried to say, oh, that's Palestinian territory because it's called Palestine. But it was called Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. It had nothing to do with Palestinians. There wasn't even a people called Palestinians. That didn't exist until Arafat decided to call himself a Palestinian in 1965. Prior to that, the Jews and the Arabs were both called Palestinians because they lived in the Palestine under the British mandate, which was called the Palestinian territory. It was the Palestinian territory under the Romans way back in Jesus' day. The Romans gave it that name, and then it was the Palestinian territory under the Ottoman Empire for 400 or 500 years. Then it was the Palestinian territory under Great Britain from 1922 until 1947, and so the people who lived there were called Palestinians. As a matter of fact, the first newspaper to announce the birth of the state of Israel, the first newspaper was the Palestine Post. Today, you know it as the Jerusalem Post. They changed their name. The Jewish Philharmonic Orchestra that existed before the War of Independence in 1948, that orchestra was called the Palestinian Philharmonic Orchestra. They've now changed the name to the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. So you can see that it is rather confusing unless you carefully study the history. Now then, the pressure's on. And let me tell you, it's on. Because here we are 100 years from the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and guess what's scheduled to happen this month? France has issued invitations to 30 nations to come to Paris on May the 30th to discuss a solution for the Middle East, for that part of the world, for the Palestinian-Israeli problem. Then once they gather there on the 30th, then he wants for them to discuss the format for an international conference so that the whole world can come together and pound out the conditions of a final agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, which then would be implemented by a UN resolution and therefore would become binding as international law against Israel and the Palestinians. All that is happening right now at the 100th anniversary of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Is that related? Could well be. Furthermore, the news comes out today that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has now offered a deal to the Labor Party to come together with his government so they can have a big government, and he's going to make the head of the Labor Party the chief negotiator to deal with the Palestinians, because he knows if he doesn't get a deal by negotiation, that they're going to impose one from the United Nations, and he doesn't want an imposed deal. He wants an agreed upon deal. And in the meantime, Donald Trump is running for office. If he would be elected, he thinks that he could pull off what nobody else has been able to. He's the man that wrote The Art of the Deal. I don't know whether that's the way it's going to unfold, but I do know this. There is going to be a peace agreement, and soon. And when that happens, the final 7 years to Armageddon will begin. So all of these things are interrelated. None of them are accidental. Let's get back to the phones now. And let's go to Aaron calling from North Carolina. Hello, Aaron.
Hey, Baxter. I got a quick thought and question I wanted to ask you about. Mainly based on the current presidential election. And it really looks like to me it's going to come down between Trump and Hillary. And I've been doing a lot of research on Trump and Hillary, and just trying to figure out what would happen if Hillary was elected. Because I do believe that she is a globalist. I do believe that she's trying to bring in that new world order. I think Trump is opposed to it. But I was trying to understand, because it does seem like she is going to get elected, how would America remain a democracy and eventually protect Israel like it's prophesied in the Bible when it's, being ran by globalists? Do you think that maybe the American people will overthrow the government like we did when, they tried to take our guns, back in the 1700s? Do you think something like that would happen, where it won't be the government protecting Israel, it would be the people would take over the government and take back our country again? Or do you think that something else might happen? I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, Aaron, we're speculating here. I don't know who's going to win the election. God hasn't shown me who's going to win the election. However, I would be surprised if Hillary ends up winning this election. It looks like to me, according to what the United States is supposed to do, that probably the Republicans will win the presidential race, whether it's Cruz or whether it's Trump, like you mentioned today. Of course, the Indiana primary being tomorrow, and all the polls are saying that Trump is ahead, and all the political prognosticators are saying that if Trump wins tomorrow, it'll be pretty much the end of the line for Cruz, even though he denies that. Nevertheless, if in fact Trump would win, everything about him and his stances that he has taken fit perfectly with what the Bible prophesies will happen. So I don't know what's going to happen for sure, but it looks like there's a good chance that Donald Trump could be our next president, believe it or not. Well, listen, we'll be back to take more of your calls immediately after this break. You're listening to End of the Age, and ladies and gentlemen, we call it End of the Age because it is the end of the age. We're on the brink of the second coming of Jesus Christ to the earth.
Hey, this is the first time I've actually tuned into your show, and my brother was telling me about it, so I thought I'd check it out. He was telling me that there's certain animals that represent the different nations and the end times.
Well, I'll never forget when I first saw this, I thought, what's this all about? It says right here, these nations will be on the earth at the time of the second coming. The lion had eagle's wing. And there's a major nation who symbols the eagle.
Yeah, that'd be us.
Yeah, but guess where the eagle's wings were growing out of?
Where?
The lion.
Hey, that makes perfect sense.
Where did America
come
come
from?
Where did America come from?
Yeah, the UK.
And then verse 4 says, I watched until the wings were plucked, broken off of the lion. Can you believe in 550 BC, God foretold the Declaration of Independence, which would occur 2,300 years later?
Wow.
Call 1-800-ENDTIME to get your copy of U.S. Discovered in the Bible.
Study prophecy wherever you go with End Times audio downloads. Listen to 1-hour lessons like Will Islam Rule the World or Seeds of Armageddon for just $4.99. Let your imagination and your understanding of prophecy dive into the end time novels like China War in the Third Temple and Dark Intentions written by Irvin Baxter. Maybe you feel bombarded by what's going on in the news and you want to just hear some good old-fashioned preaching. We have tons of sermons taught by Irvin that are rich in truth. You can go through our entire Understanding the End Time series while driving to work, cooking dinner, or wherever your busy day takes you. Let our audio library accompany you by going to endtime.com/store and click the audio downloads.
I just mentioned the fact that we call our program End of the Age. And a lot of times people may not know exactly what that means, but the Bible prophesies that we presently live in the age of human government, but very soon now, human governments are going to be cast down and Jesus Christ will begin to rule in what's called the kingdom of God. The Bible prophesies that Jesus and his church will rule the world for the next 1,000 years. It's going to be peace on earth, goodwill toward men. You may wonder, well, how can you be so positive the time is now? Well, really, it's easy. Because before the first coming of Jesus, they were given about 100 prophecies. 100. Jesus fulfilled every one of them down into the most minute detail. I'm talking about the city he would be born in, the tribe he would come from, the method of his death, his crucifixion, the fact he would be betrayed by a close personal friend, the amount of the betrayal money, what would be done with the betrayal money. I mean, intricate details, impossible for it to be faked. Jesus fulfilled every one of the prophecies, and there were many people on earth that understood the prophecies and they knew who Jesus was. Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Messiah." The word Christ and Messiah is the same word. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And there were others who knew who he was. So they were prophetically aware. That was before his first coming. You and I live right before the second coming, which Jesus himself promised before he left the earth. I'm coming back. Well, we've been given many prophecies, many more than they have. We probably have close to 1,000. And all of them are converging right now in detail. We talk about them every day here on this program. All of them are converging. The emergence of world government. What's globalization all about? Why do we have things like World Court, World Bank, World Community, International Community? Why do we have the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and on and on and on? We have all these global structures that are developing right now. It's because we are being moved into the prophesied end time one world government at this present time. That's the reason globalism has come up in some of the speeches of our politicians. Let me see if I can read that to you real quick. I saw it here just a moment ago. Listen to this. This was the commentary from the New York Times on Donald Trump's speech on international affairs, on foreign affairs. Trump has called on Americans to resist the false song of globalism. Now, globalism is one world government. So here in our present presidential campaign, Trump knows that there are forces pushing us toward one world government right now. And he's calling us to resist. Well, he's right, because world government is going to be disastrous. A man's going to rise to rule it. The Bible calls him the Antichrist. He will have a religious partner called the false prophet. And they're emerging right now. So it's become a part of our present presidential campaign. That's the reason we can know for sure that we are at the end of the age. Okay, let's get back to the phones. Oh, by the way, we do have open lines, so if you'd like to be on the air with me, 877 End Time. Let's go now to Jim calling from Indiana. Hello, Jim.
Yeah, I've got a comment and a question. The comment is that our founders did not believe in democracy. We are a republic. And my question is, there's a scripture that says worlds without end, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, like would it be a different dimensions or would it be in our universe?
Jim, I do have thoughts about that. You know, the Bible teaches that after the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ upon the earth, then the end of humanity will come. The human experience will be over. The human experience is designed to call out a people who will serve God of their own free will because they love Him, not because they're forced to. And they will become the bride of Christ. And they will He's the King of Kings, we'll sort of be the Queen of Queens. We will rule and reign with Jesus Christ for the eternity. But what happens after the great white throne of judgment, which concludes the 1,000 years of peace? We're not told that much, except we do have that tantalizing phrase that you quoted, worlds without end. We're not going to sit around and twiddle our thumbs for the next 10 million years. There's going to be things to do. God has big plans. We don't know what they are yet, but we will know. And I believe that He was just letting us know that in the future there will be worlds without end. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, I was just curious about that because I was wondering, is there other worlds in our universe, or is it going to be different dimensions, like a spiritual dimension and a physical dimension?
You know, there are concepts beyond what you and I know. The Bible says that the wisdom of men is foolishness with God. You know, in just the last 100 years, we've discovered so many things. 100 years ago, most people were walking or riding horses. Only within the last 120 years has the car been invented, the airplane's been invented, television, radio, internet, on and on and on and on. We've discovered that there are pictures flying through the room, there are sound waves flying through the room, that there are forms of communication instantaneous around the world, and we think that we're smart because we've discovered this. The Bible says the wisdom of men is foolishness with God. There are concepts so far beyond where we are right now that it's amazing. So I can't tell you what all's out there, but I promise you there are more things yet undiscovered than we have so far discovered. I promise you that.
So you think there's more worlds than just ours in the spiritual world?
Well, we know that there are many galaxies, that there are worlds way beyond where the strongest telescope can see. And we know that God occupies the entire world. He fills all space. Now that's beyond our comprehension, but the Bible teaches us that I can ascend to the highest heaven. He's there. I can descend into the lowest hell. He is there. God is incredible. The heavens are His throne. The earth is His footstool. God is huge. That's the reason He had to take on Himself a body to communicate with us, because He is so huge that we cannot comprehend Him. He fills all space. He has no beginning. He has no ending. He is forever, and that's beyond our finite comprehension. Nevertheless, so to try to limit God, don't limit Him. We could have a million galaxies like the one we're in right now, worlds without end, really. It's going to be amazing. Appreciate it very much, Jim. Thank you. Thank you very much for your phone call. Now, let's pull everything together here. This presidential campaign, there's a lot of things being argued about. It's been a hot campaign, but the most critical issue is establishment versus non-establishment. But most people don't even know what establishment means. Let me break it down for you. Establishment means believer in one world government. The establishment are the powers that have been controlling both parties for the last 50 years that have frustrated both of us. Most of us have realized that we were voting for Tweedledee or Tweedledum. We would vote for the Republicans and they'd end up doing the same thing as the Democrats. We would vote for the Democrats, they would do the same thing as the Republicans. They were all moving us in the same direction. Maybe there were cosmetic differences, but they were basically the same thing. Well, the American people have finally gotten wise, saying, we are sick of the establishment of the same old, same old. We vote to protect American interests, and we don't. We vote to win wars instead of fighting them to a stalemate and then crawling out defeated. I mean, we crawled out of Vietnam defeated. We crawled out of Iraq defeated. I mean, we might as well tell the truth. We were defeated. And it's on and on and on. We're tired of that. The American people are saying, if we're going to war, go in, win, and get out. That's what we're saying right now. And the politicians don't get it because they have been so schooled by the establishment to be a global citizen and to move us into a one world government because they have been convinced that that's the way to establish the ultimate utopian society. If we can get rid of all arms, disarm everybody, if we can get rid of all armies, if we can get rid of all borders and destroy nationhood, then we'll only have one army and we'll have one government, the United Nations. And since we only have one army, nobody's going to fight with that one army. They don't have the ability to. And it sounds good. Therefore, we'll have peace. However, the Bible teaches we'll have the worst tyranny the world has ever known. A one world government that will force compliance of every single person. And if you don't submit voluntarily, they're going to force you to. The Bible describes it all. If you don't understand these things, I would encourage you to go through our course. We have a 14 DVD series. It'll be your lifeline. I mean, if you haven't been through these prophecies, you got to do it. It's called Understanding the End Time. 14 DVDs, beautifully produced. Get your own copy. Call us. The number to call is 1-800-END-TIME. I'm talking about 14 one-hour DVDs. You go through this series, you will know more about Bible prophecy than 95% of all the graduates from theological seminary. You're going to know the future. Have you ever heard anybody say, well, nobody knows the future? Wrong. Totally wrong. The Bible says God will do nothing except He reveals it to His servants, the prophets. He has put it in His Bible, what is coming. And the scriptures even say the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica and said, brethren, you know perfectly that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. But then he said this, but you are not children of the night, that that day should overtake you unawares. You are children of the day. You want to know the future? I promise you, Understand the End Time will put it in your hands and you'll understand it. It's given in layman's language. The number to call to get your own copy is 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. You're going to know the United States in the Bible. You're going to know what's going to happen to the United States. You're also going to know which nations are going to serve as the power base of the Antichrist. You also will find out where Islam is in Bible prophecy. There is a specific prophecy about Islam. When you see it, it'll be like taking the cover off of your eyes. It will astound you. Anyway, the course is called Understand the End Time. Get the course before you go on your next vacation, before you go buy a boat, before you do anything, because you need to know what's coming. So, one more time, the number to call is 1-800-END-TIME. And while you get the course, why not become a partner with Endtime Ministries at the same time? We need you. We're racing Armageddon. We're in the end time right now. One more time, that number to call, 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. God bless you all. I'll see you again tomorrow.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.